Hello and welcome to the second episode of the podcast for the Eastbourne Literary Festival, the festival whose mission is to convince you that you are a writer. I'm Russ Miles, a local writer, listener and festival instigator, and in this podcast I will be chatting to many diverse and interesting writers about how they write and look to share any stories and advice that might inspire you to pick up the pen, keyboard or even your phone and start writing. For this episode, we're joined by the wonderful Holly Seddon. Holly is the international best-selling author of Try Not to Breathe, Don't Close Your Eyes, Love Will Tear Us Apart, The Hit List, The Woman on the Bridge, and The Short Straw. And if that wasn't enough to be tremendously exciting, Holly also has a new novel coming out called 59 Minutes, which we are guaranteed will be published in September of this year. Holly has been a huge friend of the festival since our very early days, and I couldn't be more delighted to welcome her to the festival podcast. Holly, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
It's such a pleasure to have you here. And before we get going, I just want to say thank you for your support of the festival. Thank you for your snippet of recording saying it would be a lovely idea to have it.
Pleasure.
It's so appreciated because without great authors and community that are looking to support this festival, we're very aware we don't have one. So it's absolutely essential, and thank you so much. But that has nothing to do with why we've invited you today to the podcast. Everything about inviting you today is about your latest book, at least, and how you write as well, of course. But your latest book, 59 Minutes, which you've been very kind to put out a snippet of, I think on Instagram, maybe on a few other channels.
Yes, on Instagram and Facebook at the moment.
Yeah, it's such a good first chapter. It grabs you and you are almost screaming at the screen at the end when you realize there are no more for a while. So is there any sort of synopsis you can give folks that might give people a reason to come and perhaps look at your Instagram, maybe come and grab that first chapter, and then, of course, put in a pre-order for the book too?
Well, that'd be even better. Yes, so 59 Minutes is about, well, the worst case scenario, really, that an emergency alert goes out across England to say that there are incoming missiles, and we have 59 minutes of normal life left. And then it follows three women as they spend those last 59 minutes trying to get to the people who matter to them the most. I don't want to say anything more about it because I might accidentally reveal spoilers, and I'm not slick with the pitch yet because it's a while until it's out. But yes, at the moment I'm doing something new with this one, which I've not done before, where on Instagram and Facebook, if people comment under my posts with 59, they'll be sent a link to be able to read a free extract of the first chapter. Completely free, no obligation. Don't take their emails or anything. And it's been quite good, actually, getting that feedback and that kind of seeing that excitement. And it's a bit nerve-wracking, really, putting it out there, but it's been really good.
I'm so glad it's got the reception it deserves as well. And we will put out the link to your Instagram out with the podcast as well, along with all the links to your books, so that people can go and read the pantheon of Holly Seddon. In terms of the story, just quickly, I mean, I would like to talk about how ideas come to you, perhaps, because looking across the different books you've written, there seems to be a common grounding for the ideas. And I was wondering just how those ideas surface to you, how you capture them, whether you do capture them. I remember reading once that Stephen King, I believe, doesn't have a notebook, because if the idea isn't good enough to survive being remembered, then why would it be good enough to note down? Which I thought was an interesting mode for someone who's a voracious user of notebooks. How do you manage these inspirations when they come?
I think in theory, Stephen King is right, and who am I to step to Stephen King? But in reality, my brain is just an absolute clutter box. So stuff will get forgotten, even if it's really good, especially if I'm working on something at the moment and it's maybe an idea for the future. I love notebooks, but they're scattered everywhere and I don't really use them in a very sensible way. So things like story ideas, I actually keep on a note on my phone. They can come from anywhere, overheard conversations. Usually it'll be something like a what if, or it'll be, maybe I'll be watching something that I'm really interested in a completely different genre to my own, and I think, oh, what would that be like as a thriller? Things like that sort of get me thinking. Often I find that I'll have an idea, but it's not a whole idea. So it's missing its other piece, or its other two pieces often. Those are the things that get put on the note. And then when other pieces slot into place, it all sort of coalesces. That wasn't the case with 59 minutes. 59 minutes arrived fully formed, basically, and was, God, I'm going to sound like such a Wally here, but I don't know if you've heard the story of Paul McCartney saying that he dreamt the song Yesterday, and he woke up in the morning, he was like humming it, and he was like, this must be another song, and he was searching everywhere for it. I kind of felt like that. I was like, someone must have done this, and they hadn't. And that was, I mean, you don't get those very often, and you grab them when you do, but ordinarily it's a case of bolting together different ideas and sort of, the hook is so important for me as a writer, to be interested in something, but also in terms of pitching it to people, in terms of knowing that it's going to be a book that grabs people. I write commercial fiction. It has to be something that people are going to sort of grip onto, really with one or two lines explaining what it is. And that's how I come up with ideas, really, is I come up with hooks, and then how those hooks are sort of manifested in narrative. That's what takes the time and the multiple sort of, wrong starts and cul-de-sacs and all the rest of it. Because 59 minutes, the hook has never changed, but the characters, the obstacles, the settings have never changed. I always knew it would be Dartmoor, because my thinking was that if, and it's horrible stuff to even think about. It's the stuff of nightmares. It genuinely gives me nightmares. But if there was a nuclear missile, my thinking was those remote places might be the ones that stood a chance. So the way that you'd respond to it out there would be very different to the way you'd respond to it in the city centre. And I was writing it around that, but I thought, my gosh, I'm really missing out if I don't also look at what it would be like in the absolute epicenter of panic. And then I wrote that first chapter, which hasn't changed a lot, actually. And I thought, oh, yes, this was the missing piece. And that sort of broke it all open. But yes, so yeah, ideas, I mean, they're pretty nebulous. I do have to write them down, and I do have to interrogate them as well. Like, something can feel like a good idea, but it has to last a whole book. Like, maybe it's a bit of a good idea, actually, or maybe it's one person's story and you need that sort of a mirroring or some kind of counterpoint. That's what takes the time and the chewing over, and I'm never going to be able to do it, and I can't do this idea justice, and all the doom voice memos to my writer friends and all of that. It always happens.
I'd love to pick up on a couple of things you've mentioned there. First of all, I want to talk about your writer friends. So do you have a supportive community that can say, Holly, no, don't worry, it's not you, it's the story, it's not good enough, it's not strong enough, or the characters aren't right, or something along those lines? And so, I'd love to talk a bit about how you established such a community for yourself. And I'll come to the other question in a minute. Okay. So let's start with that writer community. Don't mention any names that you don't want to mention.
I'm not going to Stephen King for one. No, that's
well, of course.
It took me a while, and partly because I lived in Amsterdam when I was first published. So I didn't have, there are Dutch writers, obviously, but I didn't have a community of British writers writing in my genre anywhere near me. When events would happen and things, it was quite a production to go to them. So I had to be quite, pick and choose. Or I would watch on Twitter, and Instagram, and see all these writers meeting up and feel quite sad. And then I decided to go to Harrogate Crime Writing Festival. I think it's called Crime Festival. It was probably 2017. I'd already been published. I think I had 2 books out, and I actually agreed to, because I didn't know anybody. A few people had blurbed me, and that you sort of have like a thank you kind of message, but that's about it. And then a writer, and I won't name her just in case she doesn't want to be named, but a lovely, she's a really close friend now, on Twitter, messaged me and said, is it mad to suggest that we both go to Harrogate and we share a room? Never met, but just we got on so well, and very unlike me, who likes a little hermit hole to crawl back into by myself, like many writers. I said yes. It was the best thing I could have done. Firstly, she's a really close friend now, thank goodness, because that could have been disastrous. But no, I just knew, with some people you just click. And also she introduced me to lots of people, and I had that confidence of having a friend next to me. I met so many people that first year that went on to be good friends, supporters of my writing, people I could call on through tricky times. And I would say I also, was it that first year? I can't even remember. Also on Twitter, as was, I met my very, very, very close friend, Gillian McAllister, who I do a podcast with. So we initially met through Twitter, and then we started DMing, and then we graduated to WhatsApp. She absolutely is somebody who I talk about my writing with. I think sometimes this job is two things: it's writing and it's being published, and they are not the same thing. And I have people who I really trust, very few people who I really trust to talk about actual writing, because when you've got an idea and you may be just starting to explore it, it doesn't take a lot for that flame to be blown out. It's very fragile. You get the wrong reaction. Even you just don't get any reaction. You don't get someone who goes, yeah, that's really exciting. What about this? And what about this? If you get someone who goes, oh, right, it just kills it. It kills it. So I'm so careful with who I even talk to about ideas. And I absolutely trust Jilly with my writing life, in that respect. And there's a few others who I trust implicitly, but then there's a much wider group who I talk about with publishing. And the reason that it's not that I don't trust them with the writing stuff, it's more that maybe they write in a slightly different genre, or that's just not something we've connected about. But the publishing life is a whole other thing, and that's, I'd say sometimes my least favorite bit. I love the writing, but sometimes there's lots of waiting and hoping and delays, and it's not always a smooth line, and having author friends who are on that journey with you is so valuable, and to just be able to offload about it, because so many people want to be authors, and please don't be put off, and that's wonderful, and I am lucky. I really, really am. However, every job has its grumbles, and so I feel like it wouldn't be fair to talk about those with some people who really, really want to be in the position I'm in. So that's why it's useful to have, I think, friends. And also, I mean, authors are just lovely. I've met some really funny, really people who don't write in the same genre as me. It doesn't matter, but just authors are just really good company. We're often really introverted, but when we do emerge, author events are such good fun.
I was going to talk to you a bit about that, actually. Festivals are close to my heart. The idea that of creating a new festival, I guess the opportunity of creating a new festival is we can learn a great deal from other festivals and the sort of tone of them. And I'd be interested to know from yourself, what could a festival do to better support authors, to build that community, to make everything you've experienced as smooth and easy to achieve, perhaps, and maybe things that others don't do? Could be too much to ask in a quick conversation this morning, but I thought I'd just put that out there to see if there's anything you go, well, definitely do this, but definitely don't do this.
I mean, I think there's lots of elements to it. There's definitely an issue of accessibility, authors on a really low income, authors who have caring responsibilities, authors who maybe have health situations or disabilities. It can be difficult logistically and financially to get there. I don't know what the answers are there, but I think absolutely an awareness and some thought around that would be very wise. I think on a sort of slightly lower key setting, a lot of us are very nervous and shy, and I don't know if I would have gone to that first Harrogate if my lovely friend hadn't put the idea in my head and sort of made it possible. I think there are definitely times when people can feel maybe that it's, I don't know, like there's cliques that they're not in, or they don't know how to approach somebody and that kind of thing. Things where maybe, I don't know, like a buddy system, or some kind of almost like a space you can go if you want to chat to people and meet new people. I think some thought around that would be very helpful. Maybe something in the run up to help put people in touch if they if it's their first time, or they're a bit nervous, or they're coming from out of the area. Yeah, and just ways to there are obstacles for authors as well as for amateur authors who aren't getting paid for it yet, because that's financially even trickier. Sometimes our publishers, if we're doing an event, sometimes the publisher has arranged it and there's some costs that they cover, but if you're totally self-financed is even harder. And I think just thinking about ways that they can access maybe some of the information or watch some of the events online, or anything where just access and also I think we mentioned this in our emails, authors and readers with children. Those caring responsibilities are often tricky. I mean, all of the festivals that I've been to have been very adult writer based. I don't know if others do this, but if it was a more broad, adult and children's books, if there's things we can do around that. I know that you were looking into maybe a creche kind of situation, or children's activities. I think my kids are all of an age now where they're not all grown up, but they're growing up. But when they were younger, that would have been an absolute godsend.
I could share a couple of things we're planning just to give us
I
all a
wasn't
little
sure
bit of
how much was
excitement.
secret.
Well, I mean, all of it's, and I haven't put a big caveat on anything like this, and it's a sort of caveat that people have to give around, publication dates and things, is that I do have a date in mind, and we do have a location in mind, but those things are so fluid that if I was to share them now, it would change. But, or it could change. But what I can share is that we're looking into engaging with a lot of the schools around the area.
Great.
Schools, colleges, and universities. There really is no division between whether it's non-fiction or fiction or any of those criteria. What it is very anti-ageist, is what we're trying to do. And by that, I mean ageist in all directions.
Lovely, good, yeah.
And they're actually thinking about doing a carnival type parade on the first day where families and classes and maybe even teachers could be walking through a portion of the town that will get blocked off and towards the venue where we'll be. And I think the venue is large enough to accommodate a fairly incredible picnic kind of atmosphere, which I'm trying to generate as well. And like you say, having a creche, having other things that facilitate people, as well as also potentially having dog walking facilities, which sounds a little bit crazy, but why not? And having
Yeah.
those things there, because I know the sorts of things that would prevent me from engaging as much as I'd like to with a festival. So we want to get rid of all of those barriers as much as possible and make it a very exciting event for all ages. It's one of the few things I think Eastbourne has is all ages. And so we're really trying to stretch and make sure that is as accommodated as possible. So yeah, one thing I wanted
Love those
to talk,
ideas.
I'm glad they're resonating. So yeah,
Yeah.
we're doing our best, really we are. And the team of people I've got that are sort of helping us and working with us on it are all full of fantastic sort of championing, really, of different perspectives, different positions, different dates. It's a huge learning curve for me and for the team, my sort of core team. But it's a great one because if we get it right, then we get such an exciting outcome, I think, from a festival like this. It should be really cool. Okay, so I've got a couple of little questions that bubble around from what you've already said. When the ideas come and you're filtering them, you mentioned you're very careful with who you speak to, because an idea is so fragile at that point in time. What do you have any approaches you take to filtering ideas? Are there things that you test your ideas with, or is it too fragile at that point even to consider testing?
Well, the first test is, do I keep thinking about it? Because I have what I think are good ideas. And sometimes I think they probably are good ideas, but they're not that interesting to me, actually. I could see how to spin a book out of it, but not a book that is a real passion project. And I want every one of my books to be, well, firstly, I always want to do better than the last one, write it better, think bigger, be braver, all the rest of it. So sometimes the idea might fall by the wayside because it doesn't actually allow those things. If I'm still buzzing about it, if I'm thinking about it, if I'm making notes about it, that's a good sign. I do need to think like how would this have a beginning, middle, and an end? Like, what is the question being asked? Is this a poem? Is this a short story? Is this, you know, something to bolt with something else. And it's thinking around what would that actually look like and why would somebody want to read it? Things like characters and setting, that comes pretty late. It's more about, does the idea have legs? And if I'm still excited about it, but I can't see how to make it a full, but what's it missing? Sometimes it's missing maybe a past. And sometimes as well, this kind of thinking happens between drafts, because sometimes I'll have got that first draft written, it's missing something, and it will be missing a point of view, or it will be missing maybe a timeline, maybe a past timeline. That was the case with The Short Straw, which was my last book and the only one that's still out, because 59 Minutes isn't out yet. I mean, they're all out, so it's not the only one. It's the most recently published. I'd written it. It stayed very true to my plan, and it wasn't quite there. It was missing something. What I realised it was missing is it's about three sisters who are trapped in, or have to take shelter in, an abandoned manor house that has poignance for their family. It's all around their late mum, who used to work there. And what was missing was actually their mother's perspective from when they were little. And as soon as I realised that, it cracked it all open. It was another voice. I wrote her voice differently to theirs. It was first person, theirs were third person. It just, something wasn't there, but I couldn't have planned that. I didn't know that in the synopsis, because I only found that out through the writing of it. So there is a limit to how much sort of pre-planning you can do before actually you find this stuff out through the writing. And that's why, anybody listening, you'll take loads of drafts. And if you start writing something and it's not working, that's the process. That's fine. That's how you find out what it's missing, what it needs, and then you start again. And maybe you're writing it from the wrong person's point of view, and that doesn't mean the idea is bad or you should stop. Like, that's a really useful bit of information you've learned. We start again, we regroup. That's very, very normal. But at the idea stage, it is that thinking about, okay, that's an idea, but what does it look like? How could I spin it out for a 2-hour film? What's the whole plot? Whose perspective is it from? Why would people want to know? Is the idea intriguing enough, or is it just an interesting premise? Is there a question that they have to know the answer to? And those are the kind of questions I ask myself.
Fantastic. You mentioned there a little bit about having to restart, regroup, go back to things. How common is that in your writing, where you have to? We talked about this actually with David Hendy in the previous episode. He was something like 70,000 words were discarded whilst he was creating one of his books.
That's nothing. 70,000 words. Yeah, I could discard that before breakfast.
And I think that's a great message to send out to people, because he said the same thing. He said, nothing's wasted. By writing it, I've learned something. I've explored something. Obviously, he's writing non-fiction, biographical kind of works where the learning is often some of the value anyway. But in your case, even in fiction, it sounds like nothing is also wasted. Does that resonate with you?
Totally. I mean, it's not, nobody does this job because they're looking for a slick, efficient process to spend time in. It's about creating the best book. And part of that involves trial and error. Absolutely. I discard a lot. My drafts get more and more polished as they go along. The first is often quite messy. It's just finding my way in. It's testing out the settings. It's stuff that I may be quite wedded to at the time, and I can't even remember it now. That first version of 59 Minutes had a different cast of characters. I think one of them was called Daphne. Like, I barely remember, but I spent months with these people. But they were really vital to get me to where I needed to be next. So yeah, I mean, honestly, I've probably junked. I mean, I'm working on my next book now, and this is my 6th version. I've got, the furthest I've got with a draft has been 35,000 words, which is my bogey number. That's often when I realise what's wrong and what needs to start again. So I've probably junked, I don't know, 150,000 words, but it's not, the ones that are important are still there. The moments, the settings, the things I've learned. Sometimes I do, not everybody does this, but sometimes there will be bits that I will lift from those old drafts and reshape and slot into the new one. But yeah, it's amazing that you spend this time sort of polishing, and that actually it's quite freeing to let stuff go when you realise it's wrong. That is part of the process, definitely.
I think that's such an important message to share with people, because there is this sense that actually there's probably 2 aspects to this that I'd like to talk about. There's the writer you were at the beginning of your career and as the writer you're becoming. I think there's a continual process.
Yes.
Um, and I think it's possibly a different challenge to discard content, if you, for want of a better phrase, early on in your career, because you go, well, I've worked hard, I've created this, I've set it aside, but I'm learning, I'm new, this is probably what it looks like. Eventually, I might have the perfect process, which is, I think, a fiction we tell ourselves
Yeah, I was like,
sometimes.
when's that coming?
Yes, I've never met anyone who's got it, and yet I still seek it myself in my own writing sometimes. And is it the perfect lighting today to write that chat? Ridiculous questions like that have no relation to the output. But then there's Holly now, who, I use the accolade at the beginning as international bestseller, which also has that, cachet of being international woman of mystery. It's a bar, or it can be feel like a bar. It could be used as a bar that can make it more difficult sometimes to potentially discard things. It can perhaps feel a little more painful to go, well, why am I still getting so much of it that I junk? Those sorts of questions can appear with success as much as any of the other challenges of being a writer. Have you encountered any of that through your career?
Absolutely. And my first book took me 3 years on and off to write, not so much because of book stuff, but more because of life stuff. But that did mean, because it was done slowly, it was maybe done, it was very, very polished, actually. And I still, when I got my agent, my first agent, had to rewrite the second half quite significantly and add another point of view. And I learned an awful lot by doing that, but I thought that I'd know what I was doing. So I was laughing, know what I was doing for the next one. But every single one, every new book is a new project that I need to learn the rules of. I need to learn the world of. Like, there is no, maybe some other authors have cracked it, but for me, it's explorative, and those drafts are explorative. So I'll always need to explore the idea, and it takes a while to surface lots and lots of good ideas. I think it's like spinning plates, that you can't do one perfect draft that nails the plot, nails the pacing, has the right characters, has all the most interesting settings, dialogue's on point. Like, you can't do all of that at once. You have to understand that you've got to get a couple of things right, and then you layer on top of it. But yeah, I mean, it was strange. I had no expectations for my first book. I just wanted to be published. I would have taken a deal from anyone for anything and let them do whatever they like, basically. And it was very lucky that I got my first deal with Corvus Atlantic, who were fantastic and incredibly passionate. Relatively small publisher, but really passionate, really knew what they were doing. And I learned a lot from them as well, from the team there. And I thought that I was just happy it was coming out and it was going to be on a bookshelf. That was almost enough. And it did so much better than I expected. And I didn't even know, I was so naive, Russell, so naive. Like, I didn't know anything about foreign rights. I didn't know it would be sold to other countries. I didn't know. I thought the deal I'd got was the deal I'd got, and that was it. And then when it was sold to America, that really was a game changer. And then it was sold in lots and lots of territories. And it felt like a dream, but that is a very high bar for yourself. And when I was then working on the next stuff, and I thought exactly what you said, I'll nail it now, I'll know what I'm doing now. And it didn't come as easily, and it still took a process. I thought it was a failing. And actually, writing my second book was the hardest writing. Slightly misleading, because I actually had written a second book, which was very, very easy because it was written before the first book came out. But that became my third book because it was quite a different genre. Again, naive, didn't know anything, didn't know that would, not be a straightforward thing. So I wrote my second book quite quickly, under lots of pressure, with a fairly young baby, an international house move, lots of expectation. It was really hard. And so I thought, okay, well, that was really hard because of all of those reasons. So when I write my next book, and so on, and it took, I think, possibly until book 4, The Hit List. I wrote my first draft really fast, and it needed lots of work. And that was the first one where I was like, oh, but I know what to do. And of course it needs lots of work, and this is fine, and this is my process. And that was kind of a turning point, because you don't see any of this. You just see the end results on the bookshelves, and you see people producing a book a year, and you don't know what's gone into that year. It's this stuff that's gone into that year. So I'm it's partly why me and Gillian McAllister started our podcast, The Honest Authors, because people didn't talk about this stuff. There's a lot more openness about this stuff now, but we didn't know a lot of this stuff, and we found, we were finding this out for ourselves, so we wanted to kind of share that, because it is always messy. Like, we're making, without sounding too, whatever, we're making art. Art is messy, whatever the format, art should be messy and explorative, and you should throw everything at it and see what sticks, and, not come at it with any kind of restrictions on yourself. But it takes a while to have the confidence to know what that looks like, and that's okay.
I hope that is something that resonates well with our audience for the podcast here, of people that might be considering being an author or writing anything really. And that feeling of just get things down, see how it looks. Certainly something that resonated with me in what you said there is that there is almost a framework for writing. The process that I've discovered is an anti-process. It's a realization there isn't one.
Yeah.
So just keep doing things.
Yeah.
And something might come together. And some of my commercial artists, or even pure artist friends, have said the same thing. They've said, really, we don't know what it's going to be until it's done.
Yeah.
I think Rick Rubin's book on this as well is really quite helpful. Is it The Creative Actor? I can't remember the title.
I think it's The Creative Actor. It's actually on my bookshelf behind somewhere.
Yeah.
But I've only got my readers on, so I can't read that far. The audio book's really good as well, because he reads it out himself with his lovely voice.
The little chimes of the bell to bring you back to the moment. Yeah. It's a beautiful production of an audio book. Actually, that's the thing I'd love to talk to you about, because you've actually done the recording, I think, for some of your audio books. Is that the case?
Our recording, what did I do? I'm trying to remember now. Was it maybe the first chapter of The Short Straw that could be included in the end of one of the other books, audiobooks? And oh my gosh, I already had lots of respect for the people who do it. It's hard. It's tiring. Yeah, it was fun though. I would do it again. I wouldn't do the whole thing. So I noticed that one of my an author that I know is recording his own audiobook at the moment. I just thought, oh, no thanks.
It's another set of skills, isn't it?
Yeah.
It must be fascinating to work with your own voice as the medium. On podcasts, it's not really the case. Particularly for my job on the podcast is to speak as little as possible, which is wonderful for me. And probably very good for the listener as well. But when you're doing Radio Holly, it must be quite challenging, I'd imagine. And my heart goes out to people trying to do that as a profession and doing it well, because you can tell the difference. Some are incredible. And I've even had the experience, I think, where I'm listening to a series of books and they change the narrator and it's suddenly so different. It's not bad, but it's an adjustment. And you realize how much you've attached to that voice, to the experience of the book that you're listening to. And it's suddenly to be a different storyteller.
I've been so lucky with my narrators. They've all been brilliant. And I got to go in when Debbie Chazen was doing the narration for The Short Straw, and I watched her work. What a pro. And just because every chapter has to be delivered with the same verve as the last. Like, you can't just be knackered. You can't be like, I'm 8 hours in, I'm just gonna read it in a really monotone way. Like, it's physical. It was really, really impressive. That's why I wouldn't do. I actually love radio work. I've done some radio work and I love doing our podcast, but that's very different. That's not having to it's actually very hard to read something out perfectly and not skip a word or fluff a word or editorialize that word in your mind, because you could think, I wish I'd put that instead of which, and then you've read it and then you've said it. It's really hard. So yeah, I couldn't do it.
I was doing it earlier as we were preparing the intro to the podcast. I was like, no, that sentence needs to be adjusted. But that's the beauty of having to redo them over and over again. So I'm gonna switch tone now a little bit towards what you read, because I spoke to David Hendy about this as well. And I had a few questions in mind, and they're always along the lines of how do you make time to read, and what are you reading at the moment? What excites you might be coming out this year that we can give a shout out to perhaps as well, apart from your own book, of course. I assume you're not still reading that one at the moment.
Now I finally stopped.
But actually, I mean, David had a really interesting perspective that I'd like to run by you and see whether it's something that, again, resonates with you. He said that to be a great writer, you have to read a lot. And in fact, that was his advice as a professor to anyone who wanted to get into journalism, is read, and read widely and randomly, because you never know what's going to chime or suddenly be an aspect of what maybe you're synthesizing yourself into what you're going to write. And I thought about that before our call today, before this conversation, because when you're writing, in David's case, potentially a somewhat definitive biography of an organization like the BBC, which everyone's going to have a knowledge of and a perspective of, you have freedom to interpret and explore. Of course you do, because your perspective is always different than other people's. In fiction, you could do anything. And is there a danger in reading things and going, we're looking at what you've written at the end of a day and going, oh, I was super influenced by that?
There's a danger if you don't have confidence in what you're writing, that you might think they do it better, and you find that but that, I think, is actually an important moment, because it makes you go, why am I trying to do that? Like, what's missing in mine? Where's the lack of confidence? Is it the character? Is it the voice? Whatever. Absolutely think reading widely and listening widely and consuming stories widely, watching widely is so valuable, and it's just a valuable thing in terms of broadening your own perspective. But for a writer or a storyteller of any kind, it is absolutely invaluable. I read really widely, and those different genres will often give me an idea for my genre that feels fresh. It's because it's fresh for my genre. And some of the books that I've loved reading recently have been crossovers. I've read a brilliant book that's it's not out yet, by Beth O'Leary, called Swept Away. It's a romance, but it's so basically two people have a one-night stand on a houseboat, and they wake up in the morning and it's drifted out into the sea and they are stuck together. Now that is also a thriller premise, and it is thrilling. It's such a fantastic book, so absolutely I would recommend people pre-order that. But reading that, I loved that because it was that crossover, but it also gave me ideas for my own. And I read a lot of speculative fiction, I read a lot of historical, I read a lot of non-fiction, and I listen to a lot of audiobooks. And I think every single one of them will have made a mark somewhere. Again, nothing's wasted.
No, and I think that I think it's another one of those messages that you want to put out there to people considering writing, is you're going to need to read. It's a kind of, there is a bar that you will be a reader as much as you are a writer, perhaps, if that chimes as well. And it's not to gatekeep the process, because I think I do believe anyone can write with the basic tools to write. And we actually have workshops we're going to be doing in the festival that show that literally anyone in that room could produce writing with some basic tools of a good enough form, a form that people could enjoy reading, and also hammering home that enjoying reading is kind of the point.
100%, yeah.
It's not supposed to be super challenging.
And enjoying writing. This is the thing. I think it's so sad when, you see kids at primary school age and they love painting and they love writing and and it sort of becomes formalized, industrialized, and then some of that joy goes. And I would love for people to remember how much they enjoyed writing little stories when they were 5, because actually that's what it's about. And it's the same with reading, and anything that feels punishing, put it down, read something else. I just think don't sort of be a snob about yourself. Like, read whatever interests you. It really doesn't matter. Just consume stories of any kind. I just think is, a broadening and enjoyable thing to do. It should all be enjoyable.
I love that message as well, because it is a contrary message to what you hear, the Hemingways of this world that say, I don't know if it was this quote about bleeding on the page. But
yeah, I've got it on a mug, obviously, because I'm that pretentious, yeah.
Exactly. And actually, I was in Saint-Germain-des-Prés this week. I just got back from it.
Yeah.
And there was this element of being there and thinking, this is where the struggle was had with this writing and these characters and people who are with very rich and complicated lives that are probably distilled in biography to, sort of either machismo or Herculean effort or any of those things, or in fact, mental health challenges. All
Yeah.
of these things are kind of summaries of these people.
Yeah.
And you sit there and go, people still think that's what a writer is. And then you meet people like yourself that are wonderfully warm, friendly, interested, engaged people that aren't sitting there in a cafe dying of drinking absinthe. And I think we've got a lot of baggage to get rid of around this a little
There's
bit.
a lot of
I'm not denying the
romance.
characters were there, but I think it's nice to...
There's a lot of romance, and I love A Movable Feast, which is Ernest Hemingway's book about that time. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Didn't relate to it, most of it, but I loved it. The bits I did relate to were about the writing and not the romance of, and as we know, anybody who knows anything about Hemingway knows that wasn't exactly the whole story either. But yeah, this idea that you have to have, I think you mentioned it earlier, perfect light, perfect conditions, perfect desk. I mean, if you need those things to make it happen, then fine. What you're actually doing is cosplaying. You're not writing, because you can write anywhere and you don't need that stuff. And that sort of barrier, if somebody's put that on you, shake it off, because that's not real. But yeah, we do romanticize. There's a lot that we romanticize that isn't always very healthy, isn't there? Not just in writing, but yeah, you don't need it to be like that. Like, I'm a mum, like I walk my dogs, I have an allotment. I made chutney the other day. That's what authors do as well. Like, we're not.
I can see the T-shirt now. Authors also make chutney. I think that's fabulous. But it is such an important balancing effect. I'm very aware that I'm eating up a lot of your time today, and as a working published international bestseller, I want to be very respectful. Your glass of absinthe is possibly warming in the other room. I would like to ask you, it's a question we always ask at the end of the podcast, and it was an inspired question I felt from the A Festival, I think, in previous years, where they asked, I think Sarah Pascoe, I think, was the original receiver of the question, which was, what advice would you give to I think the phrase was a 16-year-old you? What would you say to you that would help you in those early moments?
I've been thinking about this, and I think what I wrote down needs some explaining. So what I wrote down was, you're not a chaotic mess, you just have an artistic temperament. But what I would say is, really, it's that everything, every false start, every mishap, every, relationship that doesn't work out, every ill-advised night out, it all goes into making you the person that can then be the only person that can write this book. All of your experiences. We don't live in a straight line. We don't write in a straight line, and it would be boring if we did. So yeah, exactly that.
How wonderful. I'm going to have to leave our podcast there for this episode, if that's okay, because that is so good. Thank you so much, Holly, for the conversation
Thanks for
today.
having me.
And I hope we get to see you at the festival one way or another. I know you're a busy person.
I would
truly
absolutely love to come to the festival. And I am, yes, rooting for it and rallying from the sidelines.
Thank you very much. It's super appreciated. I really just want to close out today with a huge thank you to Holly. Her book is out, 59 Minutes, in September. Please grab a copy. I cannot recommend it enough. I've only seen the first chapter, but already I'm champing at the bit, and it's definitely something that I hope is going to be one of those amazing novels that becomes probably an amazing TV series featuring incredible actors. I think that's one of the little goals we all look for out of these incredible stories. They deserve to be told in multiple ways, in multiple mediums, starting, of course, with the definitive source from Holly. Thank you again, Holly. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Eastbourne Literary Festival's podcast. We'll be trying to put out an episode like this relatively regularly as we get used to doing it. Thanks for hanging in there with us. If you'd like to be involved in the festival or in any way would like to show your support for it, please visit eastbourneliteraryfestival.com. The links will be going out with the podcast episode. Me and the team are always looking for new folks to get involved as we bring this hopefully incredible festival to life.